Good evening, everyone. My name is Jim Wabandato. I'm a program officer at the Indian Land Tenure Foundation. We have hosted these town hall sessions as a way for landowners, ag producers, and other interested parties to learn more about Indian land ownership, Indian land management. But most importantly, what I'm hoping to accomplish is give you an opportunity to address different questions to various experts on the different topics. Tonight's topic is realty basics, or as I often say, real estate 101. The key to the topics tonight is that we want to be very, very basic and make sure that as we get into transactional and operational issues that everyone's talking from the same common set of definitions and languages. Tonight, I've invited Stacy M. And rather than kind of butcher all of the wonderful things that you've done in Indian country, I'll have you introduce yourself, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stacy M. I'm a member of the Yerington Paiute tribe, and I grew up in a farming and ranching generational family, or a generational farming and ranching family in Nevada on the Walker River Reservation, which is allotted. So you can tell with my background, I'm very interested in Indian land. I work for the University of Nevada, Reno. I'm a professor and extension educator. So I work in Mineral County, Nevada, and then I am the project director for some tribal programs and some state agriculture programs in the state. With my history, I did spend 10 years on the Indian Land Tenure Foundation Board of Directors. I got off the board, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. And some of the names tonight look a little familiar. So I'm glad to be here. And I hope that we can give you all the information that you need.
Thank you, Stacy. I thought I'd copied and pasted, but I hit the wrong thing at the moment. So I will update that. Tonight, as I mentioned, this is town hall format. The idea is that we want to do questions and answers. I've got questions prepared ahead of time, but certainly as you have your own questions, I invite you to post those to the chat. Therefore, with the Q&A format, there isn't a traditional webinar or PowerPoint agenda. Again, we're looking to get answers for Indian landowners and ag producers who might be struggling with land management in Indian country. As I mentioned, I'll post some of the resources that were shared earlier in the February so that as we go through those issues and topics, you can review them yourself. So as we look at the various issues, I think probably the biggest thing is that land, real estate, and realty are used relatively interchangeably, but when you're working with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, when you're dealing in legal avenues, the difficulty is that they have very specific definitions. I shared those earlier, and the key thing that we're going to be talking about tonight is going to be realty. Realty is land, meaning the earth and everything down to the center and kind of going up into the sky, as well as permanent improvements, which becomes part of the real estate. And then the bundle of rights or the ownership and management thing, topics that really kind of drive us crazy in Indian country, that all together would be considered realty. And so those are going to be the center of how we go through things tonight. And having said that, I know that working with various jurisdictions, meaning which government has control over which aspects of what you're trying to do, is an important place to start. Can you tell us about working with various governmental jurisdictions as an extension educator?
Sure. I think one of the first things that I always talk about when you're talking about realty, Indian land tenure, is jurisdictions. So jurisdictions is so important because you're going to have jurisdictions that involve a particular tribe, whatever tribe you're dealing with, where that land is. You're going to have the Bureau of Indian Affairs. If it's an allotment, you may have other allotment holders. If it's a tribe, how that tribe manages its land. A lot of times we deal with non-Indians that are living on a reservation and have maybe married one of the tribal members and lived their whole life. And what rights do they have? States. On some reservations, the states have particular jurisdiction, especially on those reservations that are checkerboarded. And with the state, you can also have a county, a town, or a city. So within all of those jurisdictions are what we work with, basically. And what we try to do is help you to the best of our ability. And a lot of times, as you may hear tonight, we may not tell you exactly what you want to hear. I always say that Indian land tenure, it's kind of the road to hell was paved with good intentions. I strongly believe that the individuals that wrote some of this policy had good intentions in mind, but over 100+ years, it has created what we have to live with today, which is not always in the best interest of a tribe or an individual Indian.
I appreciate that. And how is that different for you as a landowner and as a rancher? Does it work any differently?
Oh, it most certainly does. I can see over just the part or the time when I started entering into myself agriculture leases and some of the land that I lease. It seems like each 5-year period or each 5-year lease term, I'm dealing with significantly more landowners. And there's specific criteria. That's why I kind of talked to you about my cheat sheet. When you come to agriculture leases, it depends on how many landowners that you have on a parcel will determine the percentage of agreement that you need to have for that particular land lease. I'm going to turn to the left because that's where my cheat sheet is that I always use. But if there are more than 5 such owners, but fewer than 11 owners, then you need 80% of those that own that land to make the land use decision. So if you're trying to lease a property and you don't have 80%, and let's say there's 9 owners and you can't get 80% of them, you're not going to get that lease approved. Now, what is interesting about those sliding scales, and there's a cheat sheet that I don't know if Jim's providing, but he can get you that information as to how much you really need as far as percentage. But the Bureau of Indian Affairs can also approve land uses if the property is in probate and if there are owners that are in the whereabouts unknown category. In fact, we have dealt with a lot of landowners specifically on right-of-way leases or rights of way for power lines, energy sources, where the Bureau has signed off because there are a lot of owners under that whereabouts unknown.
Okay. Trying to think then. Is there anything else that we might want to cover under the different types of jurisdictions? I think we addressed. Go ahead.
One of the things that I do want to mention tonight that is very important, specifically if you're doing any type of business, it doesn't just have to be an agricultural business, but if you're doing a business and you need access to the land, regardless of whether you're growing something, or maybe if you own a restaurant, it's just a parking lot, but you need that access, you need to have a formal lease in place. Do not do a handshake lease. More than not, we get a lot of individuals that do that handshake lease and say, oh, this is my grandfather's best friend, or, you know, our grandfathers were best friends, so we're going to continue that in the family. That just does not work. what a lease gives you is it gives you that ability to say who has access to what, who pays what, is it going to be insured? If you're doing a crop share lease, are you going to bond it so you can be guaranteed payment? Leases basically take care of all those unknowns. If you don't have a lease, then that handshake can be broken by either party not doing what they originally said they would do. And as a reality and a reaction to that, it impacts your business and your overall profitability. So if you thought you were going to have this lease to put 200 head of cattle on, and you were going to have it for 60 days, and you were going to pay an AUM, an animal unit per month of $35 a head, and all of a sudden they come to you and say, oh, I want $20,000, and you've already been on the property for 30 days. So you owe me this money. Then what happens? And if you don't have a lease, then that really muddies the water. The other thing is, if you were to talk to my father, he's a strong believer in BIA leases. He doesn't even like tribal leases. BIA leases take a lot of patience to get done. One of the things I was just talking about this morning is I'm looking at having to renew a lease. There's been some death in the owners, so I know I'm dealing with probably 10 additional owners if I'm lucky, to the already 20 to 25 owners. I don't own an interest in this parcel. So when I go to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, they will not give me a list of all the owners. So, and I've had this happen my last lease period. They said, we cannot release the landowners to you. Well, I argued, I still didn't get anywhere. And I also want to preempt this by each area within the United States is different, each BIA region. So what may be okay in one region and they just pass is not okay in another region, because you have different individuals with different personalities interpreting the regulation. So in my area, 2 leases ago, so that would be 15 years ago, they handed me a list of all the owners and say, hey, you need to contact them and you need 50%. Then it was 50%. You need 51% to agree to you leasing this real estate. My last one, they said, no, we're not going to give you the number of owners and their mailing addresses. You just have to go do it. Go find them. Well, I took the list that I'd had previously and worked with a couple of the owners to get me the other owners during my last lease period. I'm just getting ready to go to the Bureau and ask for that list again. And we'll see where I get. But my one issue in doing ag leases is technically, we've always thought the Bureau of Indian Affairs is supposed to do this for you. They're supposed to contact the landowners. But the Bureau in recent history, which I'm going to say the last 10 years, has put that on the individual wanting to lease the property. Now, I've talked to individual ranchers in Montana that say they just have to show that they sent a certified letter to notify of the lease. And then in some instances, the Bureau of Indian Affairs will sign off on that grazing lease. In my area, they want a letter signed. So depending on which area of the country you're in, and I think it also depends if the tribe has a land department. Those land departments within the tribes can be very helpful or they can be very detrimental. It just depends on what scenario that you're in.
Well, it sounds like the different jurisdictions have a tremendous amount of influence on how quickly and how effectively you can do various transactions.
Yes, they most definitely do. With this process, my lease will end in December 31st, and I want to send letters out probably within the next month. And knowing that the number of landowners have really increased, I mean, that makes my job a little harder. And I do know that this is causing a lot of land to go fallow, because the harder you make it to lease, individuals just aren't going to lease it. And I'll use my family for an example, Jim. My father is 68 years old, doesn't want to deal with it anymore. So he leases most land that has 1 to 5 owners on it. That's it. Anything else over that 5 landowner, he's just not interested in anymore.
Okay. We do have somebody who raised their hand, so I think she may want to directly address the question. Is that correct, Jacqueline?
Yes, I'm Jacqueline Robinson. I manage the Realty department for the Hoopa Valley Tribe. I did have a question just because, we go through this a lot with the Bureau, and I agree. I think it's based on your region. I'm just curious because I help assist tribal members with residential leases. And right now with COVID, I mean, we're looking at a process of 1 to 3 years. I mean, it's been sitting in the office, a complete residential lease package that just needs a recording for 2 years. So I'm just curious, what's been your experience once you receive 50 or 51% and you submit all those to the BIA? What is the turnaround time that you're seeing, especially when you're looking at a renewal of every 5 years? And I'm assuming you're constantly in this cycle if you have multiple leases and they're staggered. So what is your normal turnaround time for getting this approved within the BIA once you get those permissions submitted to them?
It usually depends. There have been years when they go through with no problem, and there's years when they don't go through until the lease ends and we're maybe 2 years out. So COVID has really impacted the Bureau of Indian Affairs in that I'm not sure, and I'm hoping, I think everybody's back to work. But depending on how the Bureau is handling COVID, they have the shutdowns or they have individuals working from home. I will tell you there's an experience with one of the ranch leases that went through the Bureau and had the wrong lease number. So it was paid, but the Bureau came back and said, well, it wasn't paid. And the landowners weren't paid because under a lease, you paid the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and then the Bureau of Indian Affairs releases that money to the landowners. So in researching it, the ranch could prove that it made the check out and that it was paid and that the Bureau had collected the money. They had deposited to it, but it went to another lease number, which was the wrong amount and was not right. So I'm expecting to have a harder time in turnaround because they are backlogged. I mean, our probates are taking years. My grandfather passed.
Yeah, we've had some individuals that have been past 8 to 10 years and haven't been probated yet.
Yeah, my grandfather passed away in 2005 and they just signed the final documents 2 weeks ago.
So pre-COVID, what were you looking at as far as approval from BIA once your permissions were submitted?
6 months to a year.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Let's see here. I guess the next section or topic would be to take a closer look at what the differences are between fee land, restricted fee land, and trust land. Now you live on the Walker River Reservation. Do you have fee land as well, Stacy?
Yes, we do. We're checkerboarded. In 1902 and 1904, the reservation was allotted. They took 10,000 acres out, divided them in 20-acre parcels, gave each head of household $100 and 3 cows and 20 acres, and called it good. So that created what we have today. So we do have the fee simple, we have the allotments, and then we have tribal land. And I think talking about residential leases in the Walker River Reservation and the Pyramid Lake Reservation, and even the Duck Valley Reservation in Nevada. Nevada has traditionally called home sites assignments. And they're just now starting to turn those assignments or the terminology of that assignment, which gave certain portion of land to a tribal member where they could have a house built, usually through HUD. They're turning them into leases now because the banks don't recognize this term assignment and the tribe giving this parcel of land to an individual for a certain time period. The other issue with assignments, if it wasn't in the tribal code or the regulations, assignments could be pulled back by a tribal council at any time. So let's say this tribal member got this 5-acre assignment, they put in a septic, they put in the power, maybe even the gas in some instances, everything was set, they were ready to move the modular on, and the tribal council, somebody's family member of a council member wanted that property, they would pull it back. So they're finding that the leases are more of a binding document. The banks recognize them and they protect the tribes and that individual tribal member.
So what you're saying is I could have gotten an assignment, but without it really being a true legal contract, I was at the whim of whatever leadership might be in place.
Right, exactly. And I think the other thing that's important when you start talking residential leases is this whole idea, and I know the foundation has been trying to get this fixed, of houses being personal property. So that whole idea of personal property, it impacts us even in Nevada, in that how do housing departments issue titles for those houses now? Is that a new thing through HUD? Has HUD figured out how to issue a title that's personal property? In some cases, people say, yes, I have a title to my house. And in others, they're like, no, I can't get a title. And you go to that tribal housing authority and they're like, we don't know how to handle this. We're still trying to figure out, how all this happened. So I think there's a lot here. And that leads to, if you do have an individual that has Indian land or has the 5 acres, even it's on a lease and their spouse is non-Indian, do they get that life estate? I mean, they can own that house as personal property. The land they never can own. And in most circumstances, the tribe does not agree to lease. I've seen very few circumstances where they've given a life estate. And usually that's if it's an elderly couple, they will give the spouse that is not Indian a life estate so that they can live out their life there.
Okay. Yeah, you've covered a number of different issues. I think I might take a quick step back to highlight that with fee land, you're most likely going to be covered by state and county jurisdiction. There are some limited circumstances, but we won't get into those because that's a whole different conversation. But I think for the most part, we're probably going to spend the rest of our conversation dealing with a lot of trust land issues. Restricted fee looks, acts, and behaves a lot like trust land, but it does have a different, distinct legal status. Restricted fee lands are, in my world, mostly going to be in Oklahoma, but there are other places throughout Indian country where they do exist. The biggest thing with restricted fee lands is that the land is actually titled to the individual Indian. It may still be fractional ownership, but it will be titled to the individual, and that would make it cleaner in some ways for their ownership rights. Unfortunately, the restrictions will not just include transfer to another party or to the next generation. There may also be additional restrictions imposed that include, getting your leases, your will, all of that stuff approved by the county court. And so it is its own kind of unique animal. And when we get to restricted fee lands, I'll probably have an expert or two from Oklahoma tackle those with us. But again, for trust land, I say this all the time, and I think it escapes people. So I keep kind of hitting on it, which is that trust land, as we think of it in Indian country, is owned or titled to the United States government as a trustee to individuals, to tribal organizations, to the tribe itself. And as such, as the title holder under US law, would hold most of the rights and responsibilities of ownership. So when it comes to issues like the house or a barn on a piece of trust land, that's where Congress took action to separate that. Again, it's a very big, long saga, but they didn't want to deal with some of the pitfalls of owning a building that might have lead or asbestos contamination and have to deal with environmental remediation. And so, I mean, it was a federal problem and they solved it for the federal government, but it did create additional problems for us as Indian people and for tribal communities in dealing with that separation of those structures from trust land. Let's see. Looking at this, so in your agricultural activities or as an extension educator, what are some of the pros and cons in doing business on fee land or on trust land? I know you've covered some of them, but usually I think a lot of folks probably think of taxation, but I'm sure there are other benefits to operating on trust land, whether it be individually owned or the tribes as a lease.
I think one of the things you can look at these sliding scales of leases and you can say, oh, with the more owners you have, does your percentage go down, or with the less owners, your percentage goes up. But if you're buying, if you have the money or have a lender that will purchase trust allotments, you no longer have to own 100% of the allotment to make land use decisions. So that sliding scale actually gave that to you. So if you have an allotment with 100 owners, and what is that sliding scale? I think, Jen, 20 plus.
Yeah, with no one owning more than 10%.
Right. So you don't have to own all of the allotment. I think that is your biggest benefit if you are interested in buying interest. Specifically, you know, I don't want to give this idea to the tribes because I don't want to disempower the individual allottees, because it is very frustrating, you know, when you don't have a say in that land use. But I do think that, you know, I'm a strong believer that when they empowered the tribes to start buying interests as part of the Cabell settlement, wasn't it the Cabell settlement that they created that process? They didn't empower the individual allottee to buy interests. And in order to solve this fractionation problem, you're going to have to empower both the tribe and the individual Indian owners. And I think one of the powers is, yes, you don't have to pay taxes, but actually in my area, we're lucky in that the county doesn't even charge the fee land on the reservation taxes. They don't want to deal with the reservation at all. So they don't charge any land on the reservation if there's an Indian landowner taxes. So like the ranch that my family ranch that I have, my parents own some fee ground. They don't pay taxes on that. Now, if you were up in Washington in Yakima County, it would be a whole different ballgame. That county's going to be trying to get as many taxes as they can. I think the biggest thing with the fee simple is it could be used as collateral. So it's going to be you're going to be able to leverage that property as an asset that will help you grow your operation. When you're dealing with Indian land, you better have an asset somewhere else, or you better have other assets, whether they be cattle, equipment, because being able to just go in and leverage that land to either save your business, to grow your business, is going to be almost impossible. So it's just that more difficult. So on one hand, you can say, and I guess the older I get, I used to really dislike that trust title. I did. The older I get and you start facing you know, health problems and everything else, you're thinking, oh, they can never take that land away from me. It doesn't matter how many doctor bills I have, they can't do that. But when you're a young person and you're trying to really grow your business, and I guess some people would consider me young, I don't consider myself young, but I think that's your biggest disadvantage. Now, we do have 2 research projects we're working on right now. One is in agriculture leasing and the other is in entrepreneurship on reservations. And land access is a huge issue. How do entrepreneurs that want to start a business get access to a building or land? And how do your new farmers or your beginning farmers and ranchers, those that are younger, how do they get access? And a lot of times the reservations only have so many grazing acres. They only have so many flood irrigated or dry irrigated acres. And most of those acres are taken. So how does that work? How does the tribe, if they're holding all of those assets, enable their younger generation to get involved? We hear it on both sides, and we're doing a needs assessment right now on Walker River, Pyramid Lake, and Duck Valley. And I can tell you one of the issues that is coming out is the access to land. So first of all, you know, in a needs assessment, those that aren't involved in agriculture think everybody that is involved in agriculture is rich. Second of all, access to land. Those that have the access to land need more land. Those that want to get into agriculture can't access any land at all because land is our most precious resource. So allotments, when you have the ability to buy in, will help you. You have that ability, and leasing also gives you that ability. But again, it's tough. It's not easy to do as you have these multiple landowners. One of the biggest things that has helped me is I bought a little house off the reservation to leverage in my ag operation, because I can go to the bank and finance that anytime as long as I have the income and the credit score. Doesn't matter what my income or my credit score is with Indian land. There's only maybe Farm Service Agency or Indian Land Tenure Foundations. What is it? Indian Capital Company.
Indian Land Capital Company only makes loans to tribes, though. We don't work with individuals.
Yeah. So, you know, and Intertribal Ag Council has started that too. But to be able to access credit is almost impossible on the trust land. Now, fee land, that's different, specifically if it's been surveyed, if it has a title in the county, which most of, you know, your land, if it's been fee for a while, it does have that.
Okay. Got a hand up. I'm going to address real quick that we are hopeful. As you mentioned, Indian, I'm so used to calling them IAC, Intertribal Agriculture Council, did charter and spin off a community development finance institution. I'll name drop them. Akiptan, I'll get the website and post that in the comments. But Akiptan is established in South Dakota, but they do work throughout Indian country, and they've been working toward building their asset base to help, especially smaller and beginning farmers and ranchers. So that is a good organization to be aware of. And I would say that not only has Indian country been fortunate that Secretary Holland is Native herself, but that the Farm Service Administrator is a former director for the Intertribal Agriculture Council. And so he is very active in trying to get resources out to Indian country. And to kind of counter yours, he and I will go around and around and around that. Oh, somebody's sharing their screen on me. Oh, did you mean to do that, Dave? There we go. Got it back. And so what Zach and I will go around and around about is whether or not you can loan on Indian lands. He is affirmative that we can. And so it's going to be one of his missions to get that put into place more appropriately. Fanny, you had a question that you'd like to ask?
Yes, hi, I'm Fanny Brewer. I'm a producer here in South Dakota. I also work for IAC. I raised my hand for a question and then she answered it before I don't know how to take my hand off, I guess.
What was the nature of the question real quick? So that
It was the
audience knows.
trust land issues, the borrowing capabilities with it. I've searched high and low for banks, lending institutes. They don't want to touch it. They really don't. I mean, I suppose if they got deep enough into it, they would probably charge you an arm and leg in interest, but they just don't want to deal with it. In a way, I kind of find it understandable because they feel like they're going to borrow out $500,000 and then they have no way of getting it back. So, but anyway, she answered it. So thank you.
Wonderful.
I
All
will
right.
tell you just one thing to add on to that I found that was very interesting. When I was putting together my home place in 2009, and my parents were able to subdivide the house that I grew up in 15 acres of alfalfa land. I bought another 20 acres, and then I started leasing after that. I had to go through FSA because my parents had some of the place tied up with Farm Service Agency. And I had to call the regional director. His name then was Stan Webb. He's retired now. And I remember he had to approve the loan. And why he had to approve it is because with FSA, if I was to default, that land that was collateral would automatically revert to fee and could be sold. So he had to approve that. And I called him every day for 2 weeks at 10 a.m. specific time. And I believe he was in Arizona. And after 2 weeks, he called me and he said, your letter's done. It's been sent to FSA. This loan should be approved. We want to support those young people going into agriculture. And he said, you're one of the most persistent young ladies I've ever had to deal with. So as I say, it does take the Bureau time to move, and I am not a patient person, but I also over time have found that I don't want to make those BIA staff members my enemies either, because I've been in near the BIA offices when they flat get their butts chewed out for something that they have no control over. So I just kind of wanted to add that in there too, Jen. And that important part that somehow when BIA deals with another government agency, how all of a sudden does that real estate, if it's defaulted on, turn to fee? Because I never heard like a Wells Fargo or any other bank being able to do that.
Meaning to carry through on the defaults
Yes.
and repossess the interest. Well, I know from experience working for a couple of different tribes that with the HUD housing program, the Section 184, that the issue to do a lot of the earliest 184s, HUD was requiring the tribes to actually have foreclosure procedures on how they were going to allow the interest. The other side of that is that for the most part, they did a lot of those 184s in the earliest days on tribal trust land as leasehold assignments. And so I'm not as familiar with them doing very many. Again, it's personal experience. I'm not familiar with them doing individual owned properties as part of their 184. I think some of the agents or some of the realty specialists at agencies I'd talked with suggested kind of a self-dealing lease, although that kind of has its own pitfalls as well. Because to lease to yourself, I mean, you still end up with the property, so.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's certainly it can be tough to get lending funds to do transactions on Indian land. And in fact, actually, one of the things that you had mentioned earlier about probates themselves were a long struggle. I don't know if there were sufficient resources, but with the relocation of appraisals to the Appraisal Valuation Services Office, things have gotten a bit more stark yet. I don't know that they realized the resources that would be required for the number of transactions. And in fact, because of the Cobell settlement and the suit itself, the Department of Interior, the Bureau of Indian Affairs specifically, has been very hesitant to do any land transactions without an appraisal in place. And I can also comment from earlier presentations that the land buyback program used mass appraisals, which is much more of a computer and math driven appraisal process. It was successful enough for the land buyback program. And fortunately, a number of tribes kind of pushed and pulled so that the Bureau would use those in other transactions as well, like gift deeds, probates, and other activities. But getting appraisals done has been a major headache. And I think one of the questions we had gotten ahead of time for tonight's session was, what would be the best location for appraisals? And I don't know that it necessarily comes down to what is the best location, whether it be OST was where it was located for a while, which has now transformed into the Bureau of Trust Funds Administration. It was in the Bureau of Indian Affairs for most of its life. And like I said, now it's AVSO, which is a holistic organization underneath the Secretary of the Interior. And they also work for the Bureau of Land Management and all the other interior agencies. So I think ultimately it's just providing enough resources to Indian country for the transactions that are required as part of its trust responsibility.
I think there's another issue here though, Jim, and I say that just because I went through a refinance with a property off the reservation. And looking at that appraisal process, which looked more like a market study than it did an appraisal, but it was done in a week and a half. And we can't get an appraisal on property sometimes for a year plus. I think one of the things, and I don't know if it's been tied up, legally, is the code regarding what has to be in appraisals. Why can't a reservation have maybe an appraisal or 2 appraisals done a year, but have these market studies that show the comparables, the comps, and be able to move on them? But they can't, because we've got all this regulatory compliance within the appraisal process. And what gets me is we can do that, but if an allottee really wants to sell their land, they can waive that appraisal price and accept the price that is given to them. They have the ability to do that. So why are we so strict on this whole appraisal process? And why can't the reservations have market studies done on housing, ag land, range land, I don't know how that works because I'm not an appraiser, but it just amazed me how quick that appraisal came in on a property outside the reservation when we're still waiting on appraisals inside the reservation, and we've been waiting for them for years. We've got something majorly wrong within the system.
Sure, I think, again, this is Jim's personal opinion. It's not a bona fide fact per se that the United States government, the federal government, is the title holder. And so as a trustee, they were sued under the Cobell settlement that they weren't carrying out their trust responsibility. And as we see in general US transactions, not real estate, but just generally speaking, when you get bad actors, it causes the feds to put together additional regulations and restrictions. And unfortunately, I think to solve that problem, they've made it just much more burdensome. to do daily transactions. So I think you raise an important question for all of us to consider, and that is, how do we perhaps bring greater control to these transactions within the tribal governments, whether the tribe perhaps may, I was going to say 638, but contract the federal government to do valuations on behalf of transactions within their boundaries.
Well, and I think we need to be very careful of not limiting those tribes that don't have land departments. We have some great tribal land departments out there. I mean, I think we had an individual from Umatilla. I mean, Umatilla, from when I was on the foundation, they had a lot of services in their land department. Where I live, we've got a guy that works, that they call the land department it's a third of his job. That's it. So there really is no land department. So I agree that we need to give the tribe some empowerment, but how do we do that where it helps all the tribes in the United States? Can we have a few take the lead? Do they need to join together by region? I mean, to just say individual tribes can 638 that is scary to me, because it's going to dilute the funds so much that nobody's probably going to get any services at all unless the tribe steps up to the plate and pays for it themselves.
You do raise a very difficult situation, so I can't pretend to have the answers.
Yeah, I don't. I just, like I said, am appalled at how quick that appraisal came in and how long it's taking. And I know there's regulatory compliance involved, but there's got to be a way. And, you know, I know we have the best minds working on this, Jim. So we just need to break the code a little bit and start, because I know a lot of people too that are waiting. They can't get appraisals even for HUD homes that are paid off, that maybe the family wants to sell back to the tribe, or the tribe wants to buy so that they can fix it up and rehouse to a younger family. That can't even happen because they have no idea what these homes are worth and can't get the appraisals.
Sure. And you rate, I mean, as we go through these issues, it kind of balances back and forth, that whole delicate balance. Well, maybe I just want to have fee land and then I don't have to deal with the BIA anymore. But then you lose certain other things as well. Like I said in the earlier stages of our conversation, in very specific circumstances, the tribe may have civil jurisdiction over your fee land within the reservation, but it's not always clear that that's going to be the case.
I think it's different by tribe. Each tribe has their own set of codes. Where I live, they came out with some different codes to just rule COVID. Because if you remember in 2020, March in 2020, everything shut down. So they were trying to keep everybody in their homes. And what came out on our reservation is the current tribal code did not have any jurisdiction over non-Indians. So they had to go back and rewrite some of their codes to enforce the curfew. So the 10 p.m. curfew. So, you know, COVID has brought up a lot of jurisdictional issues too, with tribes mandating the shutdowns and, you know, saying, you know, my sisters live off the reservation and my parents and I are on the reservation on the ranch, and my sisters couldn't come. They closed the reservation to non-visitors, regardless of that's where they grew up. So I didn't get to see my family for, gosh, it was 8 months to a year until we just started saying, oh, let them arrest us. So because we were that far away, regardless of whether, you know, well, vaccinations weren't even available. So I think each tribe, like you said, those jurisdictions are important, and each tribe has a different way of dealing with different land codes. So they are a jurisdiction on the reservation that you have to work with. We work a lot more with BIA just because there is no land department, or there's a limited land department.
I see. Well, and I think when you increase the administrative responsibilities for the tribe, but do not give them additional resources, you're setting up everyone for failure, unfortunately. One of the questions we had received ahead of time is, can a partial landowner be prosecuted for moving on to their undivided interest land, their allotted lands? Have you
That
seen
is a good
trespass?
question. Trespass. I have seen individuals that have inherited land and they don't understand fractionation. They don't understand that percentage. My favorite story is, say, you know, you inherited a cow. It didn't say who got the head, who got the butt, who got the tail, who got the right hoof. So that's basically what you've inherited. I've never seen it go to a point where police were called. I've heard stories. I've seen different things. I just went deer hunting up in Ruby Valley, which is up past Elko, Nevada. There's some public domain allotments in that area. They're range from, I think they're about 80 acres apiece. And we needed to go through an Indian allotment to get to the Forest Service ground. And we knew the individual, and we paid for access and thanked him. But there was this barn, this metal barn that was kind of a house in a barn at the front of the allotment. We kind of asked, and it had some crosses and, you know, some lights and stuff. And it was some interest holders on that parcel that built that. And then they passed away. And I don't know if they were buried there or they just had their remembrance caught, but it was highly contentious. But nobody had went to the extreme to take down the barn or to call the police. So, and I do believe probably around the United States that has happened. Because people don't realize they may just own one tiny little square of a large land base.
Well, that's kind of a misnomer too, mislabeled, I should say, is as a fractional owner, you do not actually have, like, if I'm a 10% owner on 100 acres, I don't have 10 acres off in one part of the property. I have a 10% ownership share in 100 acres. And when it comes to lease transactions, when it comes to other activities, I have what might be considered a 10% voice in that conversation. But again, a lot of times I hear Indians also refer to it, it's like, yeah, I have such a small fraction, I own like a postage size stamp. And technically it may operate that way from a mathematical standpoint, but ultimately that postage is the size of your voice in determining what's going to happen on that property. And so I wanted to hear your perspective, because
Jim, I do encourage individuals that are in that situation, if they can work, if you hold a large interest in a parcel and you just can't, I'm going to say, if you can't get along with the other interest holders, or you just want to control land use, you can, and there's a term for it and it's fleeing my mind right now. Partition, yes. You can partition that, but you have to have the other landowners agree. And most of the time, if you're able to partition that works really well, because then the other interest holders get to maintain their interests in a certain amount of parcel in the parcel, but you get to subdivide. It's kind of like, if you're dealing with fee land, it'd be, okay, I'm subdividing this little parcel and I am the sole owner. So if you have the ability to do that, because in the future, it does help deciding that land use.
Okay. We've kind of wandered around, but I think it's been a great conversation from my perspective. We tackled a number of issues. As we're coming into the last couple of minutes, I'll give you opportunity to provide any parting shots or any last comments on our conversation from this evening. And the topic of real estate or realty basics.
Everybody's so quiet.
Oh, no, this is for you.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, I'm giving you as the featured speaker the opportunity to share your last thoughts.
I think I don't want to. I think dealing with Indian land is, I just want to say in the end, is a gift. It's something that, you know, as frustrated as we get and the issues that do exist, we still have the right as individuals and tribes to deal with land. What if we didn't have that opportunity at all? I mean, that is one thing that we do have. And I think after working in this area for so long, I value it more. When I first started working in it, I was angry. I was very angry that any trust property that I bought was in the name of the federal government. And I was just the beneficial user of that allotment, which Jim went over. As I work through it, I mean, I'm facing, or we are facing in Nevada, Reno is growing like crazy. So traffic is horrific. Houses are going up all around us. That reservation land that we have is kind of our home. It's our place, and it's protected by that growth. I'm still going to be able to go out my back door and walk 100 yards and see my cattle in fields. I'm still going to be able to sit in my backyard and hear birds without traffic or a highway going by. I mean, those are the types of things that I'm beginning to appreciate that I never did appreciate before. I was just talking to my neighbor 2 weeks ago, and he's non-Indian. They're on some fee land right next to me. And he's like, Stacy, do you know how lucky we are to live in a place that we're so protected from all of this growth that's happening? And I says, yeah, I'm beginning to see that and appreciate that. And I didn't always appreciate it because I got tied up in the regulations and how hard it is to get things done. But in the end, we can't give up about getting things done. But I also think, and I see it in the needs assessments that we're doing, the individuals that live on reservations, they really do like where they live. They appreciate it. Now, does that mean there's no issues or there's no access to land issues? Oh, most certainly there is. But first and foremost, they like and appreciate the reservation land that they're on.
That's a wonderful message to leave with. I thank you for sharing that. I appreciate everyone who came to the town hall this evening. I think that as we go through the various topics, some of them are a little bit more pressing at times. And I've worked through to put together my schedule for the first half of 2022. And as that gets solidified with the experts like Miss Stacy M here, then I can start sharing more and more of that. But again, keep your eyes out for the second week to get some of the initial dishing of information. And then ultimately, same time, same channel, as they say, at the end of the fourth Tuesday of the month, we will be back with another topic. Good night.